So my name is Cara Hawkins-Jedlicka. Yes, it's a very long hyphenated name. I am an instructor in the Monroe College of Communications. I am currently teaching ComStrat 562 and ComStrat 383. And basically those are media strategy classes that kind of deal with a little bit of PR. I am a first-year instructor, so I just came from being the marketing communications manager for the University of Idaho College of Law. And before that, I worked kind of the front office of the communications building, communications for UI. So I did a lot of like dealing with reporters when crisis happened. Yeah, when we moved down football subdivisions, that was a really hard day. So I've kind of done a lot with my career, but I really like branding stuff. And right when I was leaving University of Idaho, we were actually updating our brand. So I thought this would kind of be a good exercise or a good webinar to kind of go into. We're going to take the perspective today of really looking at it as a brand as a company, but you can apply a lot of these things to your personal brand. So if you were looking for like how to brand your own website, how to brand your resume, those types of things you can take these lessons from. When you look at the worksheets that I handed, that were sent out beforehand, I'm not expecting you to have those worksheets done. One is for like a bigger brand, and then one's for your personal brand. So they have a little bit of different questions, but they look very similar. Anytime during this conversation, if you have questions, just go ahead and type them in and we'll try to get to them as we go. I have about 22 slides, so we'll see how good we go through this. Okay. So what is brand voice? Brand voice really refers to the personality and the emotion infused into a brand's or into a company's communications. So when you're looking at it, you're really thinking about kind of what your voice sounds like. So why is this really important? So you want to think about brand recognition. There's a lot of different brands out there and you want to cut through the clutter. You don't want to be a Nike, like the same person as Nike or the same person as Lululemon. You have to kind of think about who you are and why you're different and how your personality kind of plays with that. It's really, you're going to lose out to better branded voices if you don't really have your own voice. So if you don't really have a point of view and you don't know who you are, you're going to lose out to your competitors pretty easily. And it's mostly through that clutter. And just, you know, really kind of think about it. Do you trust a friend who constantly changes who they are? If they go from, you know, liking something to disliking something on like a pretty regular basis, you don't trust them as much. But as a brand, if you are speaking a consistent voice, you're going to really kind of learn to trust and build that relationship. Okay, so we're going to go quickly, or we're going to talk a little bit about voice versus tone. So voice, as I said, really describes your company's personality. It's really consistent. It's unchanging. You know, you think about how you kind of describe some of those bigger brands. As I said, Nike is really uplifting and empowering. It really encompasses everything your voice does. It includes also photo style, video style, and even kind of how you talk and go back and forth in social media. So how is that different than tone? I think we've all been in trouble and we know what our parents tell us or sound like when we're in trouble, right? So suddenly you have a middle name. You know, I was always, when I got in trouble, Cara Elizabeth. It got a little bit, my parents got a little snarky with me actually. It got a lot more serious. My dad actually used the same tone he used on conference calls for when I was in trouble. So kind of think of it as kind of that emotional inflection applied to your voice. It adjusts to what's suitable for a particular piece or message. Something you would think about is like, you know, Wendy's Twitter account is really snarky. So they regularly like troll other accounts. But if they had a crisis, they wouldn't use that voice. They would have the same messaging that they had, but if like they had a meat recall or something along those lines, they wouldn't be snarky and rude. They would be a lot more apologetic. So that's kind of where you get the difference between tone and voice. Tone is kind of how you talk about something or how you're feeling as a brand, and voice is really your viewpoint. So we're going to do this in 5 easy steps, hopefully. I like having steps. So first things first is you're going to research yourself or really know who you are as a person or as a brand. So we'll give you either or. And it's fairly easy. And the worksheets that I handed out actually will help with this a little bit. So you want to define your core identity. So you want to know what your vision is as a company, what your mission statement is, and what values you hold dear. So vision is really, why does your company exist? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? How are you going to grow? Your mission statement is really like, what does your company do? What do you hope to do? And your values are kind of how you do business. What do you value and who you are? And then you're really going to define some really important things too. So you want to define your target audiences, segment your audiences. So know, who you're advertising or talking to, how they communicate, if, they're using certain social media channels, if you might have to use a little bit different slang. If NPR started using memes, we'd be all confused, right? So like really understand who your target audience is. Know your competitors. You want to know how you are different than your competitors. So you want to make sure you understand where those differences lie. What makes you stand out from them. If you're in marketing or any of the CALM classes, you know what a SWOT analysis is. You've probably have done these a billion times, but for those who haven't, it's really just understanding what your strengths are. So what makes you a really good company or brand. Your weaknesses, so really where could you improve? What are you not doing so well? Your opportunities, which are kind of taking those strengths and understanding where you can kind of go in the field or the market. So where's your opportunity to grow and think and really kind of be the best brand you can be. And then your threats might be something that's coming along the way that would harm your business. A good example of this is like newspaper businesses that didn't go digital got really threatened by the internet. You can also see this kind of now in the newspaper industry. In magazine industry, there's starting to be a lot more paywalls. I was really surprised Runner's World put the paywall this week, and it was something I was not expecting. So really those kind of like threats to your identity as a whole. Now I'm gonna briefly talk about keywords and SEO. I could talk for like 3 hours about SEO. So when we're talking keywords, really thinking about the words that if you were to be on a search engine, what people would maybe look up for you guys, and how that would help with your rankings. So when you're doing your website, you're incorporating those in. And also kind of, who you are, what area you're in, the who, what, when, where, and why will kind of all be part of those keywords. Basically trying to define yourself in very simple phrases so you can kind of work those into your identity. So this is a lot of research. People run a lot of analysis on this, but if you can kind of do this at least at the very start of this process, you'll have a really good base. And you might not have to do it as in-depth as this. You can really maybe, knock this out very quickly. But if you know your brain and know yourself really well, this won't take super long.
Do you recommend using CEO tools or just using the free Google Analytics?
So I use just Google Analytics. I can understand the back end of it, but you can always just look up some really good, I don't have any off the top of my head, but some just good material of really understanding how those keywords work. So you want to use your Google Analytics to see how it would adapt and see what they want to think. But I wouldn't go out and buy a tool. But that's just me. I hate paying for anything. As a PR professional, I never had a big budget. So I always just kind of did stuff myself. And Google will teach you a lot. They have enough videos that you can learn quite a bit from them too. So let me give you kind of an example. And I'm just going to kind of show you kind of what vision and values and mission statements. So Ben & Jerry's is really good at keeping their brand voice and brand identity across different platforms, particularly on their website. They have a whole section just defining their values, what they really care about. So you can kind of see here how they really kind of think about linking their mission to their values and the prosperity of their customers and their community. You can see here they have their mission statement very front and center, and then they really go into their 3 parts of their mission guide. And if you click on any of these, this goes into like much more detail, but they really have this really drawn out to make sure they're really sticking with their values and knowing who they are. And they're one of the few companies that gets political, and the reason is because they do know who they are and how their values match up with it. And you can see here they really even go way more into it. So when we were talking about how values or how you do business, they literally go into very, very key details on how they do business, from sourcing and purchasing their ingredients to their manufacturing practices and how they give back to the community. So they have this on the back end of knowing who they are. So when you see their messaging, it comes through. All right, we're on to step 2. Last step on the research. So the last thing that I really want you guys to do if you already have your brand is do a communications audit of yourself. So really look at the content you already have, pick out some common threads. And this could be like if you kept a blog for your company, what kind of kept coming up over and over again. If you're on Facebook, what kind of like gets the most likes and shares? The same thing with Twitter or Instagram. Is there a certain way that you describe yourself? Are there phrases or descriptions that like really jump out at you? And then again, what works best with your current audience? If you already have kind of that built-in brand on any of your social channels, there's definitely going to be something else that you can see that kind of works for your messaging. So yeah, audit yourself. And then understand too what doesn't work. Like what you have the back end of your Google Analytics and seeing like what parts of your website are not being visited. You could probably figure out why they're not being visited and figure out kind of maybe the common threads there. So kind of review your content before you kind of start changing all your messaging. You might be doing just fine and you have no idea. So this is probably my favorite step. You're going to brainstorm. You're going to do a lot of fun activities and really kind of get your messaging, get those ideas really ahead of time of what you want to do. So there's a lot of different exercises to find your voice. One of them, and I think I actually put this on one of the worksheets, is describing what your brain would be like if they were a person. Are they like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo? Know who they are, what they look like, what they do, what their job is, where they live, and really maybe just describe them as a person and draw it out. This kind of helps you really kind of think of your brand as somebody. So like if you were to describe maybe Lululemon, I'll just use that example off the top of my head, you probably have a very particular look to who they are. You know, they wear the athleisure clothes. They might be a mom, they might not be. They go to a lot of yoga, and they look like they're healthy. They're probably, drinking juice, and they probably live somewhere in the Northwest. Maybe not, but kind of who they are if you had to draw them. So think about your brand in that particular way. And then there's this one that I love, especially if you have a bigger company. And the people who provide these cards you can print out are called Cafe Pixio. Google it. They're pretty out there. But you do this card sort activity, and you're going to get a group of your stakeholders together. It'll take about 45 minutes to an hour. And you have, let's see if I can see it here. You have 75 different adjectives on the screen, right? So like these are literally 75 different adjectives. And what you're going to do is sort them as a group, and you'll probably be the moderator in this case if you are working with a group of stakeholders. So you're going to have them sorted into who we are, who we're not, and then who would we like to be. And there's also blank ones if you want to like put other words on there. So once you like sort these through, you'll go through that, give them, 15 minutes, listen to them, understand why they're putting certain words in certain ways. And then you're going to take away the who we're not. And you're going to make them rank the who we are and who we'd like to be. After they rank those, you give them the top 3 from those 2 sides, and you tell them to decide on 3. And those 3 words or those 3 adjectives are going to kind of help you figure out your voice a little bit better, because as the stakeholders are going to kind of figure it out from the outside, and you'll see it from the inside. And then just keep doing it. If you want to have more people help you out with this, figure it, make sure they're important to the company, but make sure you can do it like multiple times over. Kind of along with your personify your brand, choose your ideal spokesperson. Is it The Rock? Is it Amy Schumer for some reason? Kind of think who your ideal spokesperson for your company would be, and why that would happen. Is it randomly Lin-Manuel Miranda because you love Hamilton? I don't know, but think that through and kind of describe why you like that person. And this kind of goes to the card sort activity, but it's a little bit simpler. You're kind of say who you like. We are blank, but we're not blank. So we are funny, but we're not sarcastic. So kind of think that through. And then from all these different exercises, you can really kind of see the threads and figure out who you want to be at this point. So we'll talk a little bit about archetypes. If you do literature, if you've done reading, an archetype is a recurrent symbol or motif in literature or art or mythology. You can see here we've got 12, and most brands align with these archetypes. You have quite a few, but you can see like Skittles is considered a jester because they think they're funny. You can also see kind of how the North Face is considered an explorer, Apple the creator. So what I'm going to do is I'll read through kind of what each of these are. And yes, I have to read them because I can't remember them all off the top of my head. But I'm going to have you guys take a quiz, and then we're going to poll. 2 of these are missing on the poll, so if you're one of those, don't feel bad. We just couldn't put all the words in. So I'll give you the link. So here's the quiz. And then okay, here. Oh, there you go. And we'll open up the poll too. Okay, and the poll is here, and I'll launch it. And you guys can take this quiz. It shouldn't take too long, and I'll just kind of read through these. So the first archetype is the magician. This is someone who really wants you to have all your dreams kind of come true. So, move out of the way. Perfect. So they're fun to they don't want to just build a better toothbrush. They want to like help you keep your house clean. And they really kind of try to bring those wildest dreams to life. So think Disney. Disney is the perfect example of a magical brand. Like they're trying to really make sure you are everything you could possibly want in your life. And then you have the sage, and this is a person who is seeking truth or wisdom and thinks research is really, and knowledge is really the key to success. Harvard University, most universities like to be the sage. The innocent is everything is free and virtuous. Innocent brain will never guilt you or try to convince you excessively of something. They usually like try to do a little bit more nostalgia. So you can think about like Orville Redenbacher for popcorn. You have the outlaw. This is a person who wants to do revolution. They really want you to kind of like be hard and like be who you want to be, but be different. We have the jester who happens to be really silly. But they, you know, a little bit of seriousness. Old Spice and Skittles is really good at this. They just want you to kind of live in the moment. Let's try to see if we, okay, we've got a couple more. We have the Lover. It looks like we have a Lover on here. They really are about passion, pleasure, and sensuality. They want to associate, a brand wants you to associate them with intimate moments. So Godiva chocolate's really good there. The Explorer, so this one's kind of interesting. This is actually something we were trying to decide if we were or were not over at U of I. I mean, it's really talking about how freedom is the top priority. They want you to build a home. They might try to help you build a home, but this brand really kind of wants you to get out of the home and to explore. Subaru is probably the best one for this. I'm a big Subaru fan, but Subaru is probably the best Explorer brand you can think of. The Ruler is really about luxury and being exclusive. So Mercedes-Benz is really a good example of this. Then you have the Caregiver. That person really nurtures you. They're trying to build that trust. So think Johnson & Johnson. The Hero, this is the one I always tend to get, which is kind of, I always think it's weird. The Hero makes the world better by being the best. They're really not really concerned with being nurturing. They're there to challenge you. The U.S. Army is a really good example of this one. Then the last two, we have the regular guy, girl, person. They're not trying to be pretentious. So they're really trying to like get a really good product and not put you off. So think about Folgers instead of Starbucks. That's kind of where they're going. And then finally, you have the creator. This person kind of craves perfection. They're not really worried about the cost of production or making things at scale. They strive to create a product you can't live without. So they give me Lego in here, but I think Apple's a really good example of that too. So those are kind of the 12 archetypes. And sometimes brands fit really easily into that, but you can definitely find different ways of maybe taking bits of that archetype and applying it to your brand. And so it's kind of funny, I'm looking at this poll and we're pretty spread out across the board. I think everyone has taken it now. And I'm sure some of you are probably pretty surprised at what you got, but it's always interesting just to see. But yeah, we've got a wide variety of people in here. Surprisingly, we don't have a jester. I feel like in my undergrad classes, I get a lot of jesters. Yeah. Oh, this person's super surprised. Why were you super surprised? See if she hears me. Oh, Heather, I'll read that later, but we'll end the poll and keep moving on here.
I got Ruler, and I wouldn't associate myself with luxury.
You just never know what you're gonna get. Okay, let's exit here. Perfect. Okay, so now we've kind of gathered a lot of different data points of kind of who we are and what we think we are. And you're probably at this time really kind of refining who you are, kind of understanding the brand a little bit better, and you can probably get down to the next step. Oh, I had another photo, guys, sorry. So you want to document your verbal identity. So most brands will have a brand book. And this book, pretty thick. It's either on an intranet or they'll hand it to you. And it documents how, like, your fonts, your colors, your logos. And oftentimes they won't maybe include the verbal identity, but you want to make sure you're actually doing it. So you're really just going to create something really simple. It's called a brand voice chart. So you're going to really list your brand characteristics on the left, which you've kind of seen from both the exercises and your research. So you know kind of what you need to hit and what your audience values and what your company already kind of is working for them. And then you're going to include a brief explanation of each of those traits in the next column. And then you're going to explain how to use and not use this trait in the next two columns. So this is kind of an example. So the trait is you're funny. So the description is our coffee is unafraid to make people laugh. We want to use humor with care, but we do not want to be too goofy. We might think we're authoritative. So our content should be well researched and sound, confident in its accuracy. We do want to cite sources and sound sure of ourselves when writing, but we don't want to be condescending or cocky. Maybe the trait's helpful. Our voice should sound like someone who genuinely wants to help or solve a customer's problem. We can reassure our consumer that it's okay. It might be challenging, but we don't want to sound overly friendly. So you really kind of have to think about what your voice sounds like. The personification really helps. You know, especially if you're even going towards the tone, you can almost think of someone in your life who kind of sounds that way. But having this chart will help you really keep it so that everyone's on the same page. So you want to make sure that, like, if you have multiple writers in the company, they understand how to write your voice. You want to make sure social media matches up with what your website kind of sounds like, and you're both promoting the same things. So you want to include it in your brand guidelines. So you want to include your voice, maybe how the different tones play across different channels. That brand persona that you might have put at the front and have perfected and really kind of figured that out. Your vocabulary, so language guidelines for words you do and do not use. You know, don't use the word maybe flagship when you're referring to the university. You use a different word. And then maybe your messaging architecture. So, you know, this includes positioning. How do we kind of position ourselves against our competitors? How do we differentiate ourselves? Your value proposition. If you have a tagline for your company, put it in there. And maybe some really good examples of stories that really show that you already have that show what the company is. So you want to make sure you kind of have that all in your brand guidelines so everyone across the way understands how to communicate. It's really easy in like a company of 4, but once you start getting bigger, you really need to have kind of something that people can reference and see on the intranet and really understand. If you go to WSU, they have a brand page. I am actually not using the branding from WSU tonight. You guys can probably notice. This slide deck is very on brand for me, probably not so much for WSU. But really kind of learning where to put things and understanding how it works together and making sure everyone's really on that same page. So we'll look at another example. Skype did a really good job in their brand guidelines, looking at kind of explaining in very simple terms their voice. So words we like, free, whole world, and they kind of got silly because they kind of have a silly voice. Baboon, share, calls. But they also did words they don't like, words they don't want people to use. So peer-to-peer.
Would you recommend developing a clear brand before you start a business, or is this something that you should do after you have gotten a feel for what your brand is after it's been in practice?
Okay, so that's a good question because you don't want to launch with something that's going to just fail you. You want to launch with something that you think is pretty good. So I would say you definitely want to do the research part of this. Make sure you kind of have it dialed into what you think might work. Play with it for maybe a month or 2. Maybe don't do a quick launch, do a soft launch. See if that works for you, and then adjust. It's funny because you'll see a lot of companies go through a rebrand. Airbnb went through a huge one recently. And it really was at the start of it, they just had a really good idea. They launched a business and their branding was just funky. And so they've kind of repositioned themselves in the marketplace a little bit more, but they've also rebranded colors to make themselves look a little hipper and kind of go to your younger demographic. It's not about the Airbnb like clouds around it. So the good thing is you can always kind of reposition and update. But I would say you want to start having a pretty decent idea of your brand beforehand. So does that help at all? Okay. And then what's the other one?
If you're in an established business, how would you recommend handling rebrand? Should you transition, announce a rebrand, just abruptly change?
So U of I was kind of doing this when I was leaving, and it's easier, especially, I don't want to use them too much as an example, but it is a little easier to slowly just update all your materials if you have a lot. So you can kind of start kind of morphing towards a newer brand. If you're a bigger company, so like Airbnb announced their rebrand and they launched everything at one time and announced it as a rebrand. But you can also kind of announce it as maybe an update. So if it's not huge changes, I would just kind of slowly roll it out. And those are really like color changes and things like that. People might not notice voice changes as much. A voice change could almost happen internally without anyone really noticing, unless you're pivoting completely from something where you're kind and lovely to like snarky and mean. I don't know if you have to announce that. Like, words are a little bit easier to kind of just slowly integrate into your items. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you kind of apply this later on. But it really depends on how big of a change and how big of a company you are. So if you don't already have a lot of followers on social media and like you're kind of underground, you could probably just kind of update your look and no one's going to notice. Or if they notice, they're happy with it. But if you have a ton of followers and they love what you do and you're going to pivot, largely you want to come up with a message why you're pivoting and why you're doing this. So I hope that kind of explains it a little bit more. Colors are a really big thing. So we don't talk really a lot about color in here, but like that can be a big issue for people. So if WSU suddenly went to a different red, it would be really hard. So think about colors too. If you have a lot of like t-shirts and things like that, can be really hard to kind of rebrand and update. Or if you have a logo that you've always used. Universities are really interesting to study when it comes to rebranding because they've been around for so long. You can kind of see how it worked and didn't work along the way. If you guys ever want to dig into that, it's really fascinating. Especially when you have universities that are like 100 to 200 years old, because you have to update the brand. So as you're looking at Skype, we can kind of see they show you the words they like, the words they don't like. So this is really telling people how to write about themselves. And they go into their tone of voice, and theirs is really talking about tone. They want to make sure that the voice is always plain speaking and human. It's really explained in the simplest of terms. You want to make sure like your mom understands it. This is a little bit more UK, as you can tell with the humor and mom in here. And it's really kind of gentle wit. So, they do joke around, but they don't joke around at the expense of the customer. But this is in their brand guidelines. They don't go too deep into it, but it's enough to make sure that the writers understand how to write about themselves when they're doing, spec sheets to stories, maybe even producing videos about how Skype works for people. All right, so step 4, this is where you kind of get into things. So we're going to apply it to the messaging. We'll go kind of into this, but we won't go super deep. But you can kind of really figure out how you apply it to the messaging and how you apply it to different channels. So first of all, again, with like the brand guidebook, you want to make sure everyone is on the same page. You want to demonstrate how you can apply it to different departments. So how does HR use it when they're talking in their like HR guidebook to how you put it on the marketing side of things? Show them just kind of how maybe you take a really simple piece of content and you apply the voice and the tone to that. Make sure there's an easy access to the copy of either the brand book or those voice guidelines that you have. If you just like seriously laminate it and put it on the intranet, it will help. Show examples that you already have that hit the mark. Maybe your social media was kind of where it was the whole way. So like Facebook is like knocking it out of the park. Take a couple of those posts and just show it. I'm gonna say don't go overboard. Don't be someone who's dictatorish in how that should sound. but make sure that they're hitting the right notes. You don't want to like turn people off before they even start. And you know, there might be some things that just don't fit in the tone, but you can really sit down with that department and kind of understand what they're doing and how that works through. And make sure it can fit to everybody. So make sure that's something that just doesn't seem right. Make sure you understand how you can kind of maybe manipulate that archetype to fit to that tone or to that voice, not tone. And then you want to revise your current content. So if you're new, don't worry about this. You can just start from plainly. But you really want to make sure, because your website typically is your front page to the internet, you want to incorporate keywords and voice to your website. So make sure that voice that you have, say if it's lighthearted or serious or authoritative, is present on your website. Update the content. It could be as simple as like updating your homepage to feature a story that you think is better. Maybe even your menu options are a little bit funnier if you're trying to go for that lighthearted feel. Or your 404 page is suddenly something hilarious, or if something goes wrong. I know MailChimp's got a very lighthearted like branding voice. And so when something goes wrong on MailChimp, it's always really funny. So you can kind of do it in some small ways. Define your tone for different channels. So, you know, for example, we'll take Wendy's again. Wendy's has a very certain tone to their Twitter. So, you know, maybe you go across the way and look at either departments or different channels and how your voice is kind of adapted there. Make sure you kind of have a definition. I don't say you have to do this with all your pieces, but pieces that are very upfront and center, so maybe about your founding or about your owner or about your product, you might want to rewrite that copy to make sure it matches everything. And it's just really making sure you have that voice across all channels so it's the same. Consumers are going to trust you more if you have the same voice.
What are your thoughts on Wendy's and their frequent interaction with competing brands on Twitter?
They do it well, so I can't, and they get good publicity from it. So I can't really fault them, but they know what they're doing. Whoever their copywriter is for their social media manager is for Twitter has it on point and understands it. And they get news stories off of it, which is a huge thing. So like if they're getting publicity from their Twitter account, that's good for them. Now the thing that always kind of weirdly juxtaposes for me is that I remember Wendy's for like all the good stuff that their founder did. And so like I sometimes have a hard time figuring out how their Twitter incorporates with it. But they do stick to their talking points on Twitter too. So when they are calling out the brands, they're talking about how their meat's better and how their food's better. So they're sticking kind of to that voice. It's just a very interesting take on it. So yeah, I would say you have to be really confident in your social media manager. When I was in a social media manager role, I would have never done that in my life. I had a hard enough time just like responding to people who were angry at me. So, you know, when I was controlling the University of Idaho's Twitter or Facebook account, my tone of voice was coming from a caring, authoritative point of view. Like, we know what we're doing, but we'll also help you. So yeah, I have thoughts about it, but I don't know if they're like real or fake. I think it's interesting. I like watching them do it, but yeah, you have to be a pretty brave social media manager and really confident in your copywriting skills to really do that well. All right, so we're gonna get to the last one, and we've got to have plenty of time for questions. So, last thing on this one though, before we move on, you want to be consistent and stick to it. So don't just like randomly change it after you don't think it's working. It takes a little bit for people to sometimes pick up on it and make sure things match. As I said before, consumers will likely trust you a little bit more if you have the same voice and you seem like the same person doing things. Weirdly enough, I think we're starting to think of brands as people, especially with the way we interact with them on different channels. And consumers don't want to be reminded that it might be different. They might be working with different people. They want to think of a brand as the same person. I think we get kind of weirded out when like there's conflicting messages on different channels and different tones. So as I said, with almost the Wendy's one, it kind of is a weird conflict sometimes when it's not the same. Okay, so let's see if this will pull up for me here. We'll look at a couple of these. We're just gonna look at Blue Apron. So we can kind of see here that Blue Apron, they're trying to get me to get a coupon, is really kind of talking about kind of that family atmosphere and showing you how to cook healthy recipes. They do a really good job of kind of showing you how simple it is on their homepage. So you have something that's kind of easy. So they're looking kind of at that easy voice, talking about family, and really making sure you're sharing with, sharing healthy, easy meals. There we go. Okay, so we'll see on Facebook here. They do really a lot of the same. We're not logged in here, but no, let's keep going. So you can see they do a lot of the same. They show you that the recipe highlights are simple. They stage their, man, they got the pop-ups going tonight, but they also stage their food looking really nice. And they want you to make, show you how simple it is and how easy it is. We won't go through all of them, but if you do look at Blue Apron on Twitter and Pinterest, they do a lot of the very similar type of messaging. So they're really keeping it, they keep it simple, they keep it family friendly, and they want to keep it healthy and delicious at the same time. None of this food looks bad. And of course, we'll go to the last slide here. And this one is really something that we kind of talked about anyways with the branding. It's really just revisit and revise as the company changes over time. Airbnb changed who they were and who they were kind of targeting. Most universities change over their 200-year history. So you can always kind of revisit, and maybe your business has grown into something else. Or maybe it's got a little bit more of a voice that's working for it better that you might see on Twitter or you might see on your Facebook account. But just, always keep it in mind that you don't have to keep the same brand. I wouldn't do it a lot, but, make sure you're just revisiting it and make sure it's still working for you. You don't want to be stale. So that's really all I have for you guys. We've got 15-ish minutes, I think, for questions. So if you guys have anything else, let me know.
Is there a time frame that you would suggest? Because you don't want to consistently change your brand, but you want to give it some time to catch. Is it like an annual thing, or?
Well, I would revisit it annually just to see if it's working. Okay. But I really wouldn't change my brand more than every 3 years, I think. That seems like that's a lot.
Heather says it's insightful. Thank you so much.
So I think really just making sure you're keeping it stable. But yeah, make sure you're actually doing it too. That's when you revisit things. I think it's always helpful to revisit things as time moves on. Yeah, it was really weird.
How would you suggest measuring success? I know analytics are helpful, but should you use a snapshot over a certain period of time?
So it would be, there's a lot of ways of measuring success, right? So if you're a brand who is trying to move product, if suddenly your product's moving better when you've got a new voice, that's obviously something that might be working for you. But yeah, I would definitely make sure you have the analytics from social and from Google Analytics, your website traffic, and your sales for about, a 6-month period before you change the brand, and then compare it to 6 months after and see if there's a change. Oh, it has changed everything.
How do you think social media has changed the way brands need to shape their voice or tone?
So I think it has changed so much. Coming from, God, I feel ancient. No, I'm not. But, I think I was one of the first people to get a Twitter account in 2008, right? Or when it first started out. I was in college. I ended up teaching a class on Twitter because my professors didn't understand it. But and now I'm here. So really, I think it's because people want to interact with you. You really need to make sure you're consistent. It's really because you're so client facing with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Like, you have to be able to respond in the same voice and understand how you're responding, because if not, it's going to blow up. You know, people who do really big brands, or even even if you look at WSU Pullman, for example, like, if you say one wrong thing, it can really blow up on you. So you want to make sure you have those consistent messaging points, your tone's correct, and people expect, consumers and people who interact with you expect the same voice, because it is so front facing. It is so direct. I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous how the level of how customer service has changed too. So, I mean, we think when we work with Delta or something like that, like, we expect a certain level of back and forth.
How do you think brand voice will be impacted by the new shifts towards business to consumer direct messaging?
I think it's already happened. I think, I mean, take Nike, for example, with their new Colin Kaepernick, or the newish Colin Kaepernick ad. Yeah, so one-on-one communication. Oh, one-on-one communication wise. Well, you can measure your audience and what they like better. Because you are shifting towards that business to consumer model. So that changes a lot of what you do. And then voice shifts because it becomes more personable. You're not going to have a lot of brands, and I think you kind of see this now with the newsy tone. You kind of see them talking like a human. Proper grammar isn't necessarily a necessary thing. And really, you're trying to kind of really understand your audience from the one-on-one, and you can talk to them directly. You can cut out that middleman. You know, if you look at the old way, we've talked about this in public relations, the old way public relations worked, you used to have to go through, had to go through a medium of basically any news outlet. Now you don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. And that changes everything. So you really kind of have to think that through quite a bit. So yeah, I think it's impacted it a lot. I hope I answered that question okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll wrap it up. If you guys have questions, you can really easily find me in the in email here. I don't think I'm on the Murrow website, but I am just c.hawkins-jedlicka at wsu.edu. It's really long. So like Hawkins-Jedlicka, yeah, D-L-I-C-K-A, at wsu.edu. And if you happen to see another Jedlicka in there, that's my husband. So he would get the message to me, but you probably don't want to do that. So yeah. And thanks you guys for your time too.